You finally found yourself. After years of searching, healing, growing, you woke up. You thought everything would get easier. That clarity would bring connection. That consciousness would attract love. But instead, you've never felt more alone. The people you once related to feel like strangers. The conversations feel empty. The connections feel forced. And relationships? They're harder than ever. Not because you're broken. Not because you're doing something wrong. But because you've changed, and most people haven't. You're speaking a different language now. Operating on a different frequency. Seeing the world through eyes that can't unsee the truth. And that truth is isolating. Because awakening doesn't just change how you see the world. It changes who can walk beside you. This is why spiritually awakened people struggle with relationships. Not because they can't love, but because they can no longer pretend. And pretending was holding everything together. Here's what no one tells you about spiritual awakening. It doesn't make relationships easier. It makes them impossible. At least the kind of relationships you used to have. The surface level one, the transactional one, the ones built on shared unconsciousness, shared distraction, shared fears, shared avoidance of truth. Those relationships die. And you thought that once you healed, once you found your center, your peace, your truth, love would flow naturally. People would be drawn to your light. Connections would deepen. But the opposite happened. The more awake you became, the lonelier you felt. Because here's the paradox nobody warned you about. Awakening separates you from the collective dream. And most people are still dreaming. They're still living in the illusion, still chasing validation, still avoiding themselves, still running from silence. And you're not. You can't participate in the endless small talk anymore. You can't pretend to care about things that don't matter. You can't fake enthusiasm for drama that used to consume you. You've outgrown it. And when you outgrow the game, the players don't know what to do with you. So they pull away. They say you've changed, that you're too deep now, too serious, not fun anymore. And maybe they're right. Because you have changed, you're no longer willing to numb yourself to fit in. You're no longer willing to shrink to make others comfortable. You're no longer willing to betray your truth, just to keep a connection that was never real. But here's what hurts. You're not trying to be difficult. You're not trying to be superior. You're not judging anyone. You're just different now. And different, in a world that survives on sameness, feels like rejection. So people take it personally. They feel your detachment and call it coldness. They see your boundaries and call it distance. They witness your growth and feel left behind, not because you left them, but because you stopped waiting. You stopped putting your evolution on hold to make them feel better about their stagnation. And that's unforgivable to the unconscious mind. Because your presence, your peace, your clarity, your refusal to engage in the old pattern is a mirror, a reflection of everything they're avoiding. Every question they're not asking. Every change they're not making. Every truth they're not facing. And mirrors make people uncomfortable, so they smash them. They call you arrogant, detached, self-righteous. They say awakening made you cold, but it didn't. It made you real. And real is something most people can't handle, because real requires honesty. Real requires vulnerability. Real requires showing up fully, without masks, without games, without pretense. And most people have been wearing masks for so long, they've forgotten there's a face underneath. So when you show up without yours, it terrifies, not consciously, but somewhere deep inside, they know. They know that loving you means facing themselves. And that's a price most people aren't willing to pay. So they choose comfort over truth, familiarity over growth, the illusion over awakening. And you're left wondering if you made a mistake, if maybe you should have stayed asleep, if maybe unconsciousness was easier. It was. But you can't go back. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you know. The door closed behind you. And now you're standing in a new reality where relationships require depth, where connection requires consciousness, where love requires two awake people, not one awake person trying to love someone who's still asleep. And that's the struggle. That's why relationships are so hard now. Not because you're incapable of love, but because you're no longer capable of fake love. Think about a butterfly for a moment. When it emerges from the cocoon, it can't go back to being a caterpillar. The transformation is irreversible, complete. And here's the part most people don't think about. The butterfly can no longer relate to the caterpillar, not because it's superior, not because it judges them, but because it exists in a completely different reality. Now it flies, and they crawl. It sees the world from above, and they see it from the ground. That's what spiritual awakening does. It doesn't make you better than anyone. It just makes you different. Fundamentally, irrevocably different. And that difference creates a gap, a space between you and the people who are still crawling. Not because you want the gap, but because the gap is natural, inevitable. It's the distance between consciousness and unconsciousness, between awareness and automation, between living and merely existing. And you can't bridge that gap alone. They have to want to fly too. But most people don't. Most people are terrified of leaving the ground because the ground is familiar, safe, predictable. Flying requires trust, requires letting go, requires surrendering to something you can't control. And most people would rather stay small and safe than risk becoming something greater. So they stay on the ground and they look look at you up there, flying, and they don't feel inspired. They feel abandoned, like you chose the sky over them, like your transformation was a betrayal. But it wasn't. You didn't leave them. You evolved. And evolution doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for everyone to be ready. It just happened. And when it does, relationships change. Some deepen, most end, because the foundation shifts. What used to bond you, shared complaints, shared distractions, shared unconsciousness, doesn't exist anymore. You're not interested in gossip. You're not interested in surface level conversation. You're not interested in relationships that require you to dim your light just to make someone else feel comfortable. And that's not coldness. That's self-preservation. Because here's what you've learned. You cannot build a conscious relationship with an unconscious person. You can love them. You can care about them. You can wish them well. But you cannot create depth with someone who refuses to go deep. You cannot create intimacy with someone who's afraid of being seen. You cannot create truth with someone who's in love with their lie. It's not possible. And trying only exhausts you. It only makes you doubt yourself. It only makes you wonder if maybe you're the problem. But you're not. The problem is the mismatch, the misalignment, the fact that you're operating from a place of awareness, and they're operating from a place of survival. And survival doesn't care about truth. It cares about comfort, about safety, about keeping things the way they've always been, even if the way they've always been is killing them. So they resist. They resist your growth. They resist your boundaries. They resist your truth, not because they hate you, but because your evolution demands theirs. And they're not ready. Maybe they'll never be ready. And that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to keep flying, to keep growing, to keep honoring the transformation happening within you, even if it costs you every relationship you have. Because staying small to keep people comfortable is not love. It's self-betrayal, and you didn't wake up just to go back to sleep for someone else. You woke up to finally live, and living means accepting. Not everyone can come with you, not because you don't want them to, but because they're not ready to leave the ground, and you can't carry them. You can only fly, and trust that the ones meant for you will learn to fly too. So let me show you what's really happening. Why relationships feel impossible now. Why connection feels forced. Why even the people you love feel distant. There are 6 fundamental reasons spiritually awakened people struggle with relationships. 6 shifts that happen after awakening. 6 changes that make the old way of relating impossible. And most people don't talk about these because they're uncomfortable. They reveal truths that spirituality books skip over. Truths like awakening is lonely, not forever, but for a time. And that loneliness isn't a mistake. It's a transition, a necessary phase between who you were and who you're becoming, between the relationships you had and the relationships you're calling in. But right now, you're in the gap, the space between worlds. And in that space, everything feels uncertain. You don't fit with your old friends anymore. You haven't found your new tribe yet. You're too awake for unconscious people, but too human for the spiritual ego crowd. You're in between, and in between is the hardest place to be, because you're visible to everyone, but understood by no one. People see you changing. They feel you pulling away, but they don't understand why. And you can't explain it, because how do you tell someone, I can't relate to you anymore because I see through the illusions we used to share? How do you say, your complaints feel empty because I know you're not ready to change? How do you express, I love you, but I can't pretend anymore? You can't, not without sounding arrogant, not without sounding cold, not without sounding like you think you're better than them, even though that's not it at all. It's not about better or worse. It's about different. You're vibrating at a different frequency now, and frequencies either match or they clash. There's no middle ground, no compromise. No, let's meet halfway, because consciousness doesn't compromise. It doesn't water itself down. It doesn't dim itself to keep others comfortable. It just is. And either someone can meet you there, or they can't. And most people can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that's the grief you're carrying. The grief of outgrowing people you love. The grief of losing connections that once felt like home. The grief of realizing most relationships were built on who you used to be, not who you are now. So they collapse, not with drama, not with fights, just quietly, a slow dissolving. Phone calls that don't happen. Plans that keep getting canceled. Conversations that feel more exhausting than nourishing. Until one day, you realize you haven't spoken in months. And it doesn't even hurt anymore. It just is, because you've accepted. Some people were only meant for a season, and that season is over. So let me walk you through it. The 6 reasons why spiritually awakened people struggle with relationships. Not to make you feel hopeless, but to help you understand what's happening, why it's happening, and what comes next. Because this struggle, it's not permanent. It's a portal. And on the other side are the relationships you've been waiting for your entire life. The real one, the deep one, the ones where you don't have to explain yourself because they already see you. But first, you have to understand why the old ones had to fall away. Let's begin. Reason 1, you can no longer tolerate surface level connect. It started with small talk. You used to be able to do it. The weather, the weekend plans, the latest Netflix show. You could participate. You could engage. It didn't feel like work. But now it feels like dying. Not dramatically, just lost slowly, like something inside you is being smothered. Every time you have to pretend to care about things that don't matter, and you try, you really do, you smile, you nod, you ask the appropriate follow-up question, but inside, you're screaming because you know what's possible now. You've tasted real conversation, the kind that explores meaning, that questions reality, that dives into the depths of what it means to be human. And you can't go back to shallow. You just can't. It's like trying to fit back into clothes you wore as a child. They don't fit anymore. And forcing yourself into them only hurts. So you start avoiding. You decline invitation. You keep conversations brief. You pull away from people who only ever talk about nothing. And they notice. They say you've become distant, aloof, too serious. And maybe you have. But not because you stopped caring about people. Because you started caring about truth. And truth doesn't live on the surface. It lives in the depths, in the questions no one wants to ask, in the silence no one wants to sit with, in the vulnerability most people spend their whole lives avoiding. That's where you live now, and it's lonely there, because most people never go that deep. They skim the surface their entire lives, never question, never exploring, never really seeing. They just repeat the same conversation, the same complaint, the same pattern, year after year after year. And you used to be one of them. You used to find comfort in the repetition, in the predictability, in knowing exactly what to expect from every interaction. But awakening destroyed that comfort. Now, predictability feels like prison, repetition feels like death, and surface level connection feels like a betrayal of everything you've become. So you stop. You stop pretending. You stop participating in conversations that go nowhere. You stop nodding along to things you don't agree with. And relationships suffer because most relationships are built on surface level connection, shared activities, shared routine, shared avoidance of anything real. But you can't avoid anymore. You can't distract yourself with noise. You can't numb yourself with small talk. You can't pretend that everything is fine when you can feel that it's not. So you withdraw, not to be difficult, not to be superior, but to survive, because surface level connection doesn't feed you anymore. It drains you. Every meaningless conversation takes energy you don't have. Every fake smile costs you something real. Every moment spent pretending is a moment you're betraying yourself. And you've done that enough. You've spent years pretending, years shrinking, years participating in a world that felt hollow. You're done. You'd rather be alone than surrounded by people and still feel empty. You'd rather have silence than noise that drowns out your truth. You'd rather have no connection than connection that requires you to disappear. And that's not wrong. That's awakening. The realization that you can't build real relationship on fake foundation. That depth requires depth. That truth requires truth. That real connection can only happen between two people who've stopped pretending. So you wait in the loneliness, in the silence, in the space between the old and the new, knowing the right people will meet you in the depths. You won't have to drag them there. You won't have to convince them. They'll already be diving. And when you find them, everything will make sense. Why you had to let go. Why you had to pull away. Why you had to choose truth over comfort. Then there's this, the thing nobody warns you about. You start seeing people clearly. Not who they pretend to be, not who they think they are, but who they actually are. Behind the performance, behind the persona, behind the carefully constructed image they've spent years building. You see the mask. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're at dinner with a friend. They're laughing, talking, performing, and you see it. The way they adjust their story based on who's listening. The way they exaggerate to seem more interesting. The way they hide their pain behind joke. The way they're not really there at all. They're playing a role, acting out a script they've memorized, being the version of themselves they think people want to see. And you feel it. The inauthenticity, the disconnection, the distance between who they are and who they're pretending to be. And you can't say anything. Because how do you tell someone, I can see through you? How do you say, you're not being real? You can't. So you sit there, watching the performance, feeling the exhaustion of it all, and slowly withdrawing, because you can't connect with a mask. You can only connect with a person. And most people have been wearing masks for so long. They don't even know they have them on. It's not malicious. It's survival. The world taught them early. Don't be too much. Don't be too vulnerable. Don't let them see the real you. So they hid. They created a version of themselves that was safe, acceptable, lovable, but not real. And now, after years of performing, they've forgotten who they actually are. The mask became the face. The performance became the identity. And the real person, buried so deep, they'd need to excavate their entire life to find it. And most people won't. They're too scared, too attached to the image, too invested in the lie. So they keep performing. And you can't participate anymore, because awakening stripped your mask off. It forced you to face yourself, to see the performance you were giving, to recognize all the ways you were hiding. And you stopped, not because you wanted to, but because you couldn't hold the mask up anymore. It was too heavy. So you let it fall. And for the first time, you showed up as yourself. Raw, unfiltered, imperfect, real. And it was terrifying, because real is vulnerable. Real is messy. Real doesn't always get liked, but real is free. And once you tasted that freedom, you couldn't go back to the prison of pretending. So now you sit across from from people and you see their masks. You see the fear underneath, the insecurity, the pain, the desperate need to be accepted, and you feel compassion because you were there too. You know what it's like to hide, to perform, to give people the version of yourself they want instead of the version that's true. But compassion doesn't make it easier. It makes it harder because you can't pretend not to see. You can't engage with the mask and ignore the person underneath. You can't participate in surface level conversation when you can feel the depth being avoided. So relationships become exhausting because you're the only one being real. You're the only one showing up without armor. You're the only one willing to be seen, while everyone else is still hiding. And that imbalance, it's unbearable. You can't build intimacy with someone who won't take off their mask. You can't create trust with someone who's terrified of being known. You can't love someone fully when they won't even let you see them. So you pull back, not with judgment, but with acceptance. You accept not everyone is ready to be real. Not everyone wants to be seen. Not everyone can handle the vulnerability required for true connection, and that's okay. But it means you can't stay because you're done performing. You're done pretending. You're done wearing masks. And you're done pretending not to see there. So you walk away from friendships that feel like theater, from relationships that require costume, from connections that punish authenticity. And you wait for the ones brave enough to remove their masks too, the ones willing to be seen, the ones ready to show up as they actually are. Not perfect, not polished, just real. And when you find them, you'll know, because real recognizes real. And the connection, it won't require any performance at all. Here's where it gets real. Before awakening, you had no boundaries, or if you did, they were suggestion, flexible, negotiable, easily crossed. You said yes when you meant no. You stayed when you wanted to leave. You tolerated disrespect to keep the peace. You gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left. And people loved that version of you. The accommodating one, the one who never caused problem, the one who put everyone else first, the one who had no self. But awakening changed that. It forced you to look at what you'd been tolerating, the disrespect, the one-sided relationships, the emotional labor you provided for free. And something inside you snapped, not with anger, with clarity. You saw it. You saw how much of yourself you'd sacrificed, how many times you'd shrunk, how many boundaries you'd let people cross because you were too afraid to defend them. And you decided never again. So you started setting boundaries. Real one. I can't talk right now. That doesn't work for me. I need space. No, just no. Not no, but let me explain. Not no, I'm sorry. Just no. And people lost their minds. They called you selfish, cold. You've changed, and you had. You'd finally learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're love. Love for yourself. Respect for your energy. Protection for your peace. But people who benefited from your lack of boundaries, they saw it as betrayal because they'd gotten used to unlimited access, to calling whenever, asking for whatever, taking without asking. And now you were closed, not to everyone, just to those who only showed up to take, and they couldn't understand. I thought we were close. I thought you cared. I thought you were there for me, and you were. But you finally realized they were never there for you. They didn't ask how you were, didn't notice when you were struggling, didn't offer support unless you explicitly asked. The relationship was one way. You gave, they took. You showed up, they disappeared. You carried their burden, and they never even asked if you needed help carrying yours. So you stopped. You stopped overextending. You stopped prioritizing people who didn't prioritize you. You stopped giving your energy to relationships that only drained you. And it felt like freedom, but it also felt like loss, because boundaries cost you people. People you loved, people you'd known for years, people you thought would always be there. But they weren't. They were only there when you had no boundaries, when you were available 24/7, when you said yes to everything, when you had no self. And the moment you reclaimed yourself, they left. Not always dramatically, sometimes just slowly. The calls stopped, the texts went unanswered, the friendship faded, without a single conversation about why, because they didn't need to say it. You both knew you weren't useful anymore. You weren't the person they could dump on, the person they could call at 2 a.m., the person who would drop everything, no matter what you were going through. You'd become someone who valued herself, and people who don't value themselves can't handle people who do. Your boundaries trigger them, because your boundaries remind them they could have boundaries too, but they're too scared, too afraid of being alone, too terrified of disappointing people. So they stay boundaryless, and they resent you for choosing differently. So relationships end, not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself. And that's not selfish. That's awakening. The realization that you cannot pour from an empty cup, that you cannot love others if you don't love yourself. That boundaries aren't rejection. They're respect. Respect for your time, your energy, your worth. And anyone who can't respect that doesn't belong in your life. So you let them go, the takers, the boundary crossers, the ones who only loved you when you had nothing left for yourself. And yes, It hurts. But staying hurts more. Sacrificing yourself hurts more. Betraying your own needs to keep someone comfortable hurts more. So you choose you, finally, fully, unapologetic. And the right people, they'll respect that. They won't push, won't guilt, won't demand. They'll honor your boundaries because they have their own. And the relationship, it'll be balanced, equal, reciprocal, real. Not built on your self-sacrifice, but on mutual respect. That's what you're waiting for, and it's worth the wait. There was a time when you thought love meant saving people, fixing them, carrying their pain so they wouldn't have to. You saw someone struggling, and you made it your mission to heal them, to rescue them, even when they didn't ask, even when they didn't want it, even when it destroyed you in the process. You couldn't help yourself. Their pain felt like your responsibility. Their problems felt like your purpose. And somewhere deep inside, you believed your worth was tied to how much you could fix. So you gave everything, your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth. You listened for hours. You offered solutions. You sacrificed your own need to tend to theirs. And it felt noble. It felt like love, but it wasn't. It was codependency dressed up as compassion. And awakening ripped that illusion apart. It showed you the truth. You can't save anyone, not your partner, not your friend, not your family, no one. Because saving someone requires them to stay broken. It requires them to stay dependent. It requires them to never take responsibility for their own healing. And that's not love, that's control, disguised as care. You weren't helping them grow. You were keeping them small. Because if they healed, if they became whole, they wouldn't need you anymore. And somewhere inside, you needed to be needed. That's the wound awakening forced you to face. The wound that said, I am only valuable if I'm fixing someone. I am only lovable if I'm useful. I am only enough if I'm sacrificing myself. And when you saw that, everything changed. You stopped rushing in to save people. You stopped offering unsolicited advice. You stopped absorbing their emotions like they were yours. You let people have their own experience, their own pain, their own lessons, their own journey, without making it about you, and people hated it. The ones who were used to you fixing them suddenly had to face themselves, and they weren't ready. So they blamed you. You don't care anymore. You're not the person I knew. You've become selfish. And maybe you had, if choosing yourself is selfish, if having boundaries is selfish, if refusing to sacrifice your peace for someone else's comfort is selfish, then yes, you'd become selfish. But really, you'd just become whole. You'd stopped outsourcing your worth. You'd stopped needing broken people to feel valuable. You'd stopped using other people's problems as a distraction from your own, because that's what fixing people really is. Avoidance of your own pain, your own wounds, your own work. It's easier to fix someone else than to face yourself. But awakening doesn't let you hide anymore. It forces you inward. It forces you to do your own work, to heal your own wound. And when you do, you stop needing to fix others. Not because you stop caring, but because you finally understand everyone is on their own path. And your job isn't to save them from it. Your job is to walk yours with integrity, with presence, with love, but not with rescue. Because rescue is disempowering. It tells someone, you can't handle this. You're not strong enough. You need me to survive. And that's a lie. Everyone is strong enough. Everyone has the capacity to heal. Everyone can save themselves if they choose to. But most people don't choose to. They choose comfort. They choose avoidance. They choose to stay in their pain and blame the world for it. And you can't fix that. You can't love someone into awakening. You can't sacrifice yourself into their healing. All you can do is hold space without fixing, without saving, without taking on their burden. Just present. But most people don't want present. They want solution. They want you to do the work for them. They want you to carry what they refuse to carry. And when you stop, they leave because they weren't looking for a partner. They were looking for a savior. And you're not that anymore. You're just you, whole, healed, boundaried, no longer willing to lose yourself in someone else's chaos. And that costs you relationships that were built on you being the fixer, the healer, the strong one, the one who never fell apart. But you're not that anymore. You fall apart now. You have your own struggles. You need support too. And the people who only wanted you when you were strong, they can't handle you when you're human. So they go. And you let them because you finally understand. Real relationships aren't built on need. They're built on choice. Two whole people choosing to walk together, not because they need each other, but because they want to. That's what you're waiting for now. And it's worth every person you had to release to find it. Here's the hardest truth. Most people are emotionally children, not because they're bad people, but because they never learned. They never sat with their pain, never questioned their reaction, never took responsibility for their emotion. They just react, blame, anything to escape feeling what they don't want to feel. And before awakening, you tolerated it. You made excuses for their behavior. They're just stressed. They didn't mean it. They're going through something. But now you see it for what it is. Emotional immaturity. And you can't unsee it. You can't engage with someone who won't take responsibility, who blames everyone else for their feeling, who refuses to communicate like an adult. It's exhausting because every conversation becomes a minefield. One wrong word and they explode. One boundary and they punish you with silence. One honest moment and they make you the villain. You can't have a real relationship with someone like that. You can only walk on eggshells, and you're done walking on eggshells. You're done managing other people's emotions. You're done shrinking yourself to keep someone else regulated. So you require emotional maturity now, self-awareness, accountability, communication, the ability to sit with discomfort without lashing out. And most people can't. So most relationships end, not because you're asking for too much, but because you finally stopped accepting too little. Razao 6, you vibrate differently now, and frequencies don't lie. And finally this, the thing you can't explain, the thing that sounds woo but is undeniably real, you vibrate differently now. Your energy change, your frequency shift, and you can feel when someone's energy doesn't match yours, not intellectually, physically. You walk into a room and your body tells you, this isn't your space. You talk to someone and something inside you contract. This isn't your person. It's not judgment. It's resonance, or the lack of it. Before awakening, you ignored those signals. You pushed through the discomfort. You forced connections that didn't feel right. But now you trust the signal. When your body says no, you listen. When your energy feels drained after being with someone, you notice. When a relationship requires you to lower your vibration just to participate, you leave because you finally understand. Not everyone is meant for you. Not everyone is on your frequency. And trying to force connection with someone whose energy clashes with yours is self-violence. So you become selective, protective, sovereign. You don't give your energy to just anyone anymore. You don't force relationships that feel off. You don't stay where you're not resonate just to avoid being alone, because being alone and aligned is better than being surrounded and depleted. And that selectivity, it makes relationships rare, because most people are still vibrating at the frequency of survival, of fear, of ego, of unconsciousness, and you're not. You're vibrating at truth, at presence, at peace, and those frequencies don't mix. Oil and water, light and shadow, awake and asleep. They can coexist, but they cannot merge, so you wait. In your frequency, in your truth, in your sovereignty, knowing the ones who are meant for you will match you, not because they're perfect, but because they're awake, conscious, evolving, vibrating at the frequency of truth. And when you find them, you won't have to force anything. The connection will be effortless, the resonance undeniable, the relationship real. Until then, you protect your frequency, you honor your energy, you trust the knowing inside you that says, not yet, not them, keep going. So here's the truth about spiritually awakened people and relationships. It's not that you can't love, it's that you can't pretend anymore. You can't do surface level. You can't ignore the mask. You can't sacrifice your boundary. You can't fix people who won't fix themselves. You can't tolerate emotional immaturity. And you can't force connection where there's no resonance. That's why relationships are hard now. Not because you're broken, not because you're too picky, not because something's wrong with you, but because you finally know what real looks like, and you refuse to settle for anything less. Most people spend their entire lives in fake relationships, performing, pretending, playing role, never truly seen, never fully known, just surviving. But you're not surviving anymore. You're living. And living requires truth, depth, authenticity, consciousness. And most people aren't there yet. So you walk alone. For now, not forever, just for now. In the space between who you were and who you're becoming, between the relationships you had and the relationships you're calling in. And yes, it's lonely, but it's also sacred. This solitude isn't emptiness. It's preparation. You're learning to be whole alone, so that when love comes, you won't need it. You'll choose it. That's the difference. The old you needed relationships to feel complete, to feel worthy, to feel loved. The awakened you're already complete, already worthy, already loved by yourself. And from that place, you attract different people. Not the ones who need saving, not the ones who take without giving, not the ones still hiding behind masks, but the ones who are already whole, the ones who've done their work, the ones who show up real, boundaried, conscious, the ones who match your frequency. And when you meet them, you'll understand why everyone else had to fall away, why the loneliness was necessary, why awakening cost you every relationship you had, because those relationships were blocking this one, the real one, the deep one, the one where you don't have to explain yourself, where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to choose between being yourself and being loved, because with the right person, those are the same thing. So if you're in the loneliness right now, if you're struggling with relationship, if you're wondering why it's so hard to connect, know this: you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing everything right. You're honoring your truth. You're protecting your energy. You're refusing to settle. And that's brave. Most people never do that. Most people stay in relationships that drain them because being alone is scarier. But not you. You chose yourself. You chose truth. You chose to walk alone rather than lose yourself in connection. And that courage, that's what will bring you the love you've been waiting for. Not the love that completes you, but the love that celebrates you. Already whole, already free, already enough. The loneliness is temporary, but the person you're becoming, she's forever. And the relationship she attracts will be worth every person you had to release. Every moment you spent alone. Every time you chose yourself. So keep going.